Hello, humans. Welcome back to the study of the Bible in chronological order. It is written in Genesis 15, 7 to 21. And he said to him, I am the Lord who brought you out of Ur of the Chaldeans to give you this land to possess it. He said, Oh, Lord, how may I know that I will possess it? And so he said to him, Bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Then he brought all these to him, cut them in two, laid each half opposite the other, but he did not cut the birds. The birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away. Now, when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and behold, terror, great darkness fell upon him. God said to Abram, Know for certain that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, where they will be enslaved and oppressed for 400 years. But I will also judge the nation whom they will serve, and afterward they will come out with many possessions. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You will be buried at a good old age. Then, in the 4th generation, they will return here, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet complete. It came about when the sun had set, it was very dark, and behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch, which passed between these pieces. And that on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, To your descendants I have given this land, from the river of the Egypt as far as the great river, the river of Euphrates. The Kenite, and the Kenizzite, and the Cadmonite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Rephaim, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Girgashite, and the Jebusite. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 15, verses 1 to 6, God took Abram outside to give Abram a visual representation of how numerous his descendants would be and how great God is to fulfill his promises. But what follows in Genesis 15, verses 7 to 21, is a passage that is packed with intriguing information. God promises Abram the land, and then Abram asks how he will know. And then God does not give Abram an immediate answer, but instead gives him a command of all these things to do. And then Abram acts in faithful obedience to the command. He does all these things. And then he showcases dedication of his faith to keep that command when he drove the birds away. And then God provides his answer as to how Abram will know when God says in Genesis 15:13 that Abram should know for certain. Okay, but how? How should he know for certain? Because God spoke. God told him, therefore he should know for certain. And then what follows is a seemingly mysterious and confusing process for ratifying the covenant with Abram, where a flaming torch passes between the two halves of the carcasses. Now, this incident is still open to interpretation to this day, and scholars have debated about this for centuries. I will share with you what I believe this represents, but first, we must understand what this incident most certainly is not and cannot be. It was not a sacrifice because, well, there was no altar, there was no offering of the animals to a deity, there was no ritual with the carcasses, the meat, or the blood. It was also not divination because the entrails were not examined, and Abram did not initiate this act as a way to foresee the future. In fact, God initiated this incident with a command for Abram to do it. But it was also not an incantation because no words were spoken to accompany a ritual. Now, some scholars believe the incident to be a royal land grant ceremony, when animals are typically understood as substituting for the participants or proclaiming a self-curse if the stipulations are violated. Now, though many examples of a royal land grant ceremony do exist in the ancient Near East, those examples they entail only one animal. There is no smoking oven or a passing through the pieces with a flaming torch. Some scholars believe it references a ceremony of purification, but in purification role, neither the torch nor the censer ever pass between the pieces of cut up animals in any historical literature that we have available to us. Further weaknesses in the fact that God doesn't need purification, and Abram is a spectator, not an active participant, so neither does he. In addition, dead animals would not undergo purification. And finally, some scholars believe that this incident represents confirming signs related to the promise of what will be done to the nations. But if that is the case, what is the connection to the cutting up of the animals? Okay, well, the proper context of this passage, it refers to a covenant between God and Abraham, that Abram's descendants, they will be enslaved in a foreign land, and then God will bring them out from slavery to possess the promised land. Now, since God's presence is frequently linked directly with fire, which we will see all throughout the book of Exodus, it seems likely that the Lord is the one who passes between the animals here, and that the dead animals, they symbolize Abram's descendants, or all of Israel, and that the birds of prey that Abram drove away, they signify their enemies, the unclean nations. The promises look forward to the Lord being in the midst of the Israelites after they come out of Egypt, and represents the larger story of the Lord being in the midst of people who are dead in their sins. Satan, demons, all workers of wickedness, they desire to swoop down and devour us while we are dead in our sins. They desire to devour the covenant, to get us out of God's favor. But those who are dedicated in faith will be alive in Christ and able to resist the enemy, who will then flee, as it is written all throughout the New Testament. This covenant guarantees that God will fulfill his earlier promise to make Abram into a great nation. We read about that in Genesis 12:2. All that is solemnly pledged here, it eventually comes to pass for a brief period during the reign of Solomon, and we'll read about that in 1 Kings chapter 4. Also, later in our chronological journey, we're going to see in Jeremiah chapter 34, we will see how Jeremiah 34, verses 17 to 20, describes almost the same event of some type of covenant ratification ceremony. However, that passage describes how the people of Judah are about to receive punishment because they broke their covenant with God from when they passed through the dead animals. But here, in this current story under examination, it is the Lord himself who passes through while Abram is the spectator. Therefore, this story describes how the Lord is the one making the covenant. Essentially, this incident proclaims that because the Lord initiated this covenant, it will not be broken, because he is incapable of acting wickedly and he will never break his promises. And it is this scenario that will actually help us to make sense of the future incident that we'll see in Jeremiah chapter 34, and likewise, that incident in Jeremiah 34, it will help us to make sense of this current scenario. So the Lord showcases now that he is faithful on his end of the covenant, so that it will be understood later the Israelites are the ones who broke the covenant, not God. And so Abram's descendants will indeed possess the land currently occupied by all of those clans that are listed in this passage. But who are all of those clans Why are they listed? What is the significance of even listing them? Well, Scripture identifies them now so that they will be understood later. Likewise, they're mentioned so that we will be able to later look back and understand more fully. So, who are the Kenites? Well, as we will later see in our chronological journey, Moses' father-in-law is a Kenite, and he's a priest of Midian, which this suggests some kind of relationship between the two. Well, the Kenites will play a role as allies of Israel from the Mosaic period through the time of the Judges and even into the monarchy. The non-Israelite Balaam he'll prophesy the downfall and captivity of the Kenites. We'll read about that in Numbers chapter 24. And then in Judges chapter 4, we will see Jael, the woman who kills Sisera by driving a tent peg into his temple. Well, she is the wife of a Kenite who was separated from the Kenites. So the Kenites live with the Amalekites during the time of King Saul, but because the Kenites had shown mercy to the Israelites during the Exodus, which we haven't seen that yet, but we will, Saul will allow them to depart before he attacks and he defeats the Amalekites. The Kenites are also mentioned during the time when David will briefly live among the Philistines while he's hiding from Saul. We'll see that in 1 Samuel 27. The Kenites are also included in the genealogy of David as a part of the tribe of Judah. That's 1 Chronicles 2:55. The widespread geographical area of the Kenites' habitations and the individual Kenites who separated and they're associated with various peoples seem to support the suggestion that these people are, well, we know they're itinerant smiths or metalworkers. We see this in 1 Chronicles 4. They maintain their separate identity and are not completely absorbed by other peoples. Okay, so who are the Kenizzites? Well, this is a clan whose name probably derives from Kenaz. It's a descendant of Esau, who was an Edomite chieftain. We'll see this soon enough in Genesis chapter 36. Well, they live in the Negev, the southern desert area that is part of the territory of Judah after the conquest. Well, they may be closely related to the Kenites, but that is unknown. And then we will see in Numbers chapters 32 and Joshua chapters 14 to 15, Caleb the son of Jephunneh. Well, Jephunneh, he was a Kenizzite, which it apparently indicates marriage with a woman from the tribe of Judah. Okay, who are the Cadmonites? Well, this is a clan whose name means Easterners. They may have been included in peoples who were collectively called the Eastern peoples. Well, it is written in Job 1:3, we'll see this soon enough, that Job was the greatest of all the men of the East. Other people referred to as the Eastern peoples or the peoples of the East include the inhabitants of the land where Jacob will eventually search for his wife. We'll see this soon in Genesis chapter 29. Those who will rise up with the Midianites against Gideon. That's in Judges chapter 6. And the wise men whose wisdom will actually be surpassed by Solomon. We'll see that in 1 Kings chapter 4. All right, who are the Hittites? Well, they are descendants from Canaan. We saw that in Genesis 10:15 and 1 Chronicles 1:13. The Israelites will later be instructed to eradicate the presence of the Hittites from the land in Deuteronomy chapter 7 and 20. However, the Israelites will only partly succeed in that, and they will eventually settle among other peoples. We'll see that in Judges chapter 3. In Joshua 1:4, it will refer to the entire region of Canaan and Transjordan as the Hittite country. And then later we'll also see in 2 Samuel that Uriah, the husband of Bathsheba, he is a Hittite, and under Solomon's reign, the Hittites will actually be conscripted to forced labor. We'll see that in 1 Kings chapter 9. Later during the exile and afterward, the Hittites, they become a byword. We'll see this in Ezekiel chapter 16, and they exemplify practices from which pious Jews will seek to distance themselves. We'll see that in Ezra chapter 9. Okay, well, who are the Perizzites? This clan is one of the Canaanite nations. They are included in the northern coalition against the Israelites during the conquest. We'll see that in Joshua chapter 11. And although they are listed as being defeated in Joshua 12:8, they will not be entirely eliminated because, well, we'll see that they actually persist in Palestine. We see that in Judges 3 and 1 Kings 9, and even up to the post-exilic period, which is in Ezra chapter 9. All right, who are the Rephaims? Well, this clan is a people group also called the Anakites in Deuteronomy chapter 2. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 3, they say they're described as giants who will make Moses' spies feel like grasshoppers in comparison. And they are associated with the Nephilim in Numbers 13:33. So, again, this is another reason why the Nephilim were mere men, albeit sometimes extremely tall. Okay, who are the Amorites? Well, the Amorites are descendants of Canaan. They will eventually be driven out from the Promised Land along with the other Canaanite peoples. And in Numbers chapter 21, the Israelites will conquer in battle and they will settle in the land of the Amorites. Now, at times, this name, Amorites, it simply represents the general population of Canaan, much like the Canaanites that we see in Joshua 24:15. This illustrates that throughout much of the biblical period, Amorites are not so much a specific ethnic or cultural designation, but will be assimilated into the general Canaanite population. The Amorite and mixed influence on Israel is expressed at length in Ezekiel's allegory. This is in Ezekiel chapter 16 of the unfaithful Jerusalem. Who are the Canaanites? Well, that is a general description of the descendants of Canaan. Who are the Girgashites? This clan descended from Ham. We saw that in Genesis 10:16. They will eventually be defeated by Joshua in the conquest in Joshua chapter 24. And finally, who are the Jebusites? Well, the Jebusites are descendants of Canaan. We see that in Genesis 10:15-16. And the king, Adonizedek, he will organize a coalition of kings to attack Gibeon and Israel. We'll see this in Joshua chapter 10. The Israelites are never truly able to drive out the Jebusites, and they remain in control of Jerusalem until it becomes conquered by David's men. We'll see that in 2 Samuel chapter 5. And then Araunah, a Jebusite, will eventually sell David his threshing floor so that David can build an altar there. That's in 2 Samuel 24. And then eventually, the Jebusites are forced to be slave laborers by Solomon in 1 Kings 9, because apparently that's what Solomon likes to do. He likes to force people to be his laborers. We'll read all about that later. So in conclusion, it becomes evident that God's promise to give Abram's descendants the promised land will inevitably bring about conquest. It's going to happen. But as the investigation of the genealogy accounts clearly reveals, all the righteous people will be absorbed into God's promise, whereas all of the wicked people will be purged and excluded. God himself even provides us with a clue in Genesis 15:16 as to why the future conquest will be put on hold for over 400 years when he says that their iniquity has not yet reached its fullness. So in fact, we saw already in Genesis 14:13 that the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, they are currently allies with Abram in this story. Therefore, God has declared in advance he is so patient, he is willing to wait over 400 years to enact judgment against wickedness so that the righteous during those centuries, they will not experience God's wrath and judgment. However, this also means Abram will never see God's promise fulfilled. Abram will never see God's promise fulfilled because it's not going to happen until 400 years later. Hence, Abram is a man of faith, and his faith was credited to him as righteousness, as it is written in Genesis 15:6. So, what about you? Are you a man or a woman of faith? When the birds of prey swoop down on God's covenant with you, will your dedication of faith to the Lord's commands be enough to drive them away and make them flee? Or will you allow the enemy to consume your promise due to your lack of dedication? We are looking forward to the fulfillment of the new covenant of our glorified bodies on the new earth under the new heavens. Will you faithfully endure until the end of your life, even if you never see Christ's second coming in your lifetime here on this earth? Just as the Israelites will have to endure centuries of slavery in a land that is not their own before coming into this promised land by God, so we also will be servants in this world of which we are not of. That's what Jesus said. We're not of this world. So we will have to be servants in this world which we are not of before coming into the true promised land of the new earth, which was promised by God. So will you continue to live faithfully obedient to the Lord's commands, even if you will not receive the blessing here on this earth, but only on the new earth that is to come? Truly, it is for this reason that Jesus, he will say in John 20:29, that the ones who do not see and yet believe are blessed. And this is also why Paul will say in 2 Corinthians 5:7, we need to walk by faith, not by sight. God's promises will be fulfilled, but they will be fulfilled in his perfect timing. Therefore, we might not see fulfillment of certain things while in this life here on this earth. However, we do have the history of monuments built and testimonies shared to fall back on as we continue to advance forward in faith. Therefore, we have all we need to be guardians of the covenant. So until next time, drive those birds of prey away.